And this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Wednesday's edition, and we're broadcasting from both Southern California and that great Midwest city, Chicago, Illinois. Tom Amenta, I know you recently moved to Chicago. Welcome back to the show. Happy to have you as my guest today.
Thank you very much for having me. And yeah, as you can see, once was sparse. We're still moving in and getting the ye old home office straightened out. So yeah, it's been a busy couple of weeks.
Yeah, you've gone from red state Nebraska to blue state Illinois, and maybe you can have some influence turning more people red in that state. Speaking of red and blue, hey Tom, it was election night last night across 5 major states. Give me your impression on the results from last night.
I think you saw the typical mixed bag on the right. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we've had conversations, here about, what is the sort of Trump influence versus sort of more of the traditional red. And you saw a mixed bag. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I take Arizona out of it a little bit because, when you're a Peter Thiel acolyte and Peter Thiel is personally dumping millions of dollars into your campaign and not being shy about it, like that to me was just, one dude hooking up another dude. But, past that, I think you saw, I think it's from the right hand side, I think that you saw that mixed bag that we keep seeing. And I think that it's going to be very open in terms of, sort of who sort of wins out and what sort of agenda gets pushed forward if the Republicans do take back gain ground in the House like we expect and possibly take back the Senate, which especially as the primaries keep falling out, I think is certainly in play. And then in Kansas, I got to be really honest, whatever side you want to land on Roe v. Wade, and your opinion can be your opinion, like that was democracy in action. And I'm reading some of the pieces where they want to talk about one agenda versus the other. It's like, no, this is what this country was designed to do. And vote your conscience, vote what you believe, and that's what the majority has. So, I appreciated that, the way that happened. And I think that's, if you're going to say, hey, states, this is your issue, that then put it out there like that. There's some other places that I got to be really honest, some of the trigger laws or some of the things like that in other states, I got to be honest, I didn't appreciate legislation doing that. I feel like if it's going to be a state issue, put it to a vote. So I was really proud that the democratic process actually happened rather than, some of the other ways that has been adjudicated inside the states. So, and to me, I'm really agnostic to the results. I'm just glad that the process happened, and it was nice to see, again, American democracy and work. And I always, whether I agree with something or not, especially with a double digit, win, I respect that the will of the people for the state of Kansas is what's going to be implemented, and I respect that.
Yeah, Tom, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, there's a constitutional right built in the state of Kansas Constitution that they're allowed to have an abortion up to whatever. I'm not sure the number of weeks, but whatever it is, it is. And the fact is, the state reaffirmed their desire to have that in their constitution.
Yeah.
That is what states that, again, take it out of the federal government's hand and give it to the states. I concur 100% on that. And it was a fairly decisive margin. It was just interesting watching. I was flipping some of the stations last night. I don't want to read too much in any one piece, but that is a clear warning shot to Washington, D.C. I mean, I think so. So, for the people of Kansas, they made that decision, and it's their state. Good for them. Let's go through some of the results. I mean, you mentioned Peter Thiel, who threw a lot of money into Blake Masters' campaign. And he had Trump's backing. I mean, it was no surprise that he won that primary. But Peter Thiel is a conservative Republican swimming against a bunch of leftists in the area he comes from. He's donated millions of dollars to Republican causes. And so now we've got a matchup set with Blake Masters running against Mark Kelly in what should be a pretty tight race in Arizona.
Yeah. I think that is one of those, Arizona is a relatively purple state. And if you want to see this sort of general trend, I mean, you and I have debated and sparred a little bit on the effects of the economy versus the effects of public policy, which I do think that the Kansas decision has certainly played into the Democrats' strategy of trying to make it more of an issue-based thing as opposed to the economy. but yeah, I think that you're going to see. I think that's going to be a huge bellwether election. And
Mm-hmm.
if you want to see where we're going to go, if you want to see the Senate, the Democrats have to hold serve because it's a 50-50 split and they only have the tiebreaker because they have the White House. So they've got to hold serve at best. I mean, I haven't seen anything where it really looks like they have a chance to increase their seats in the Senate. I've only seen some roadmaps to maybe one flips in one spot. They sneak another one out and basically hold serve. So no more is that going to be more important than Blake Masters versus Mark Kelly in Arizona. Like that is maybe the sort of state of the nation bellwether, I'd argue, especially with what you and I have been talking about all the time of how much does policy matter? How much is it an economic thing? Some of these things that I think the media will sometimes bend to their will or to try and get a couple extra clicks. Well, I think you're going to have a really good opinion about that, especially because the other Arizona senator is such a wild card. And, I mean, she's like, I know she says she's a Democrat, but half the time I'm not,
Well,
I wonder if she's like from the.
Kyrsten Sinema has proven to be sort of in the John McCain independent stream. I mean, McCain was a Republican, but he voted a lot like an independent. She's a Democrat, and she's pretty independent. And I got to tell you, from everything I've seen about her, I don't know which way she's going to go on this bill, but boy, I got to tell you one thing. If you're Manchin and Schumer, I'm just asking this question not as a Republican analyst. Why didn't they include her in those negotiations? That's sort of bizarre to me. We'll get to that a little later in the show, but yeah. Another, and I agree with you. I think the election in Arizona could go either way. I mean, it could go Mark Kelly's way. It could go Blake Masters' way. Again, your point, Tom. It's currently a Democratic-held seat in what used to be a red state. It's now a purple state, but right now Arizona has 2 Democratic senators. It pretty much mirrors Georgia. Georgia used to be a red state. Now it's called a purple state, but they have 2 Democratic senators also. So that will be a close one to watch. I think in the state of Missouri, when the Attorney General Eric Schmitt won that race last night, I think a lot of Republicans were thrilled with that victory because Trump embraced the former governor, who was a disgraced former governor. Had he won, they would have lost that seat. I mean,
absolutely,
no question,
absolutely.
And Eric Schmitt is
none.
Pardon me. Go ahead, Tom. Yeah.
Oh no, I was just saying, like there was absolutely if the former governor won, there was no way on earth that was happening. No.
Right.
Like they were going to get walked all over. I mean, the Claire McCaskill machine in Missouri, and I know it's like first I was in Nebraska, now I'm back in Illinois, so I've always been, we always understand that the McCaskill Democratic machine in Missouri is strong and they're well organized, and they would have just trounced that attorney general seat, and it would have been blue for sure. I'm totally with you there.
Now with Eric Schmitt winning, I think there's a high likelihood that Missouri remains a Republican seat for retiring Republican senators. So I think that's one where the Republicans will hold serve, and I don't think it's even going to be that close, to be honest with you, because Missouri is trending as a sort of a reddish pink type state, and I think that outcome thrilled a lot of Washington Republicans and general Republicans all across the country. I was really happy with that result. Moving on now, here's an interesting one. Peter Meyer, and I believe he's probably from that Meyer grocery chain family. I'm guessing based on his name.
No, he's not actually.
Oh, he's not.
That's one of no, he's not. I mean, I didn't know that was a common enough last name. That's what I thought, but he's not.
He's separate from that.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember. Like his family does have money, but it's not that.
Okay.
And I can't
that's
remember what it is,
gigantic money. That family. But anyhow, he won election 2 years ago. He's a first-term congressman, and this is where you get into the ugly side of politics. Okay.
Right.
He was one of the 10 that voted to impeach Trump. Okay. He was an elected representative. He made a decision. Right. And the Democratic Party threw $500,000 to John Gibbs, his opponent's campaign. Gibbs was previously part of the Trump administration. He's much more conservative than Meyer.
Right.
And he beat Meyer last night by a couple percentage points. Now, from what I read, Gibbs' entire campaign had raised about $500,000. So when the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee gave him $500,000, that sort of doubled it. Now, the hypocrisy of this is you had Democrats clamoring for Republicans, vote your conscience. Well, Meyer voted his conscience.
Yeah.
And what do the Democrats do? They reward his opponent. So the point in this, had Meyer won that primary last night, I think he would have won the general election, because that district is trending left. It's not a lefty, but it's more center left. So if you take a moderate, which Meyer was, he was sort of right in the middle, and now you take someone on the right-hand side of the scale, that may be a harder district to win. So from a purely political standpoint, the Democrats probably did the right thing. From an ethical point of view, do you just throw ethics out in politics, Tom? I mean, is it just, hey, we got to win at all cost?
So, I mean, the first thing is that I was actually surprised, because the Democrats also did that for the gubernatorial primary here in Illinois. The super far right guy, they dumped a whole bunch of money and got him into the seat to go up against Pritzker, because, Illinois it's a weird state in the fact that, like, the gubernatorial race is a little more purple than people think it is. Like, the Chicago machine's always going to run, and trend it blue, but there's enough, farmers and everything like that, rural agrarian based conservatism in Illinois, that the governorship sometimes does switch. First of all, I love Pete Meyer, and I will always have the most respect for him possible, because him and Seth Moulton got on a plane, went to Afghanistan, and assessed the situation, and both of them basically flipped the double bird. Their respective parties, like, no, we're not sitting on the sideline. We're combat veterans. We are going to go assess and see what this actually looks like, because it's unacceptable the way it's been painted. So I now and forever am Team Pete Meyer, and I always will be. He also, like we've talked about, I'm more of a centrist, and he, you know what I'm saying? Like, he's much more in that sort of center line, John McCainian mold that I always loved. That sort of prepared to be independent to a certain level.
Yeah, I concur.
Yeah, and now, but to the politics of it, I'm surprised that the Dems are actually willing to get off their moral high horse and play the game a little bit. If you want me to be completely honest, like, there's a level of sort of shocked, admiration for the fact that they're willing to, pull a couple of tricks out of the Karl Rove playbook. And I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think that it's a lack of ethics in politics. And I mean, it's one of those things that if you're going to talk about ethics in politics, the way that, Mitch McConnell handled the Supreme Court nominations under Obama versus under the Trump administration, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, like, come on, that's politics at its scummiest. Like, whether it fits your narrative or not, like, you cannot bang this drum. And, Lindsey Graham really showed his butt on that, especially some of the stuff. So, at the end of the day, you play to win, and you play to support your ideals. And, the fact that the Dems were willing to, frankly sacrifice some of their, what they see as a perceived moral high ground, it surprised me. It really did. And, like, I don't know if it's going to work or not. I think it's interesting that there's always a risk to a certain strategy like that, but the fact that they tried it, again, surprised me a little bit.
Well, the proof of the pudding is going to be in the fall election. When again, we don't have Mr. Meyer, who I think he won last time by 6 points. And if you win by 6 2 years ago, and now you're in a much more friendly environment, even though they sort of redrew the district, it's a little more left-leaning, I think he would have won. Now we're in a situation where we'll see come November if the Democratic strategy of funding the Trump Republican pays off, or if it bites them where. And we won't know that until the vote comes in October, November.
Yeah, and speaking of bite, the other veteran in the House, my retired working dog, she apparently thinks there's danger. So I apologize for a little bit of the noise. I think that I will be very interested to see, because, like, the gubernatorial race here in Illinois, I think that they just wanted the landslide for Pritzker to make it look good. Like, he was already on track to win. But I think that where you're going to see the Meyer districts, some of those other purple districts and things like that, Washington State's got some of that when they had their primary that didn't get as much coverage, but some far right and far left, depending on where you are in Seattle, versus more Yakima rural Washington. There's some of that going on. It's going to be very interesting. It really is, because I think that you don't just have this, one of the things about the Meyer, money Democrats doing that is I feel like there is becoming a larger and larger contingent of more centrist Democrats that are really tired of the far left, quote unquote, progressive movement and the AOCs and the Illinois Omars and all that. In your state, for example, Katie Porter in Orange County, like she's a Dem, but she's super at risk right now, and she's a very moderate centrist Democrat. She's kind of like the other side of the Pete Meyer coin.
Yeah, the only problem with that analysis, Tom, is that the Democrats in the House, they seem to vote in block unison. I mean, it doesn't.
Yeah.
There's hardly any deviation. That's why it almost seems like, as you correctly say, the far left is leading that party, but they almost always vote lock, stock, and barrel, whatever Pelosi tells them to.
They do. I think that Kevin McCarthy had a roughly similar under, the height of Trumpism before Trump got in trouble and before, some of the impeachment and things like that. I think that's just politics these days. Like the whips on both sides have been really, really strong for the past decade, which has not always been the case. So I think that's more the party knowing how to get its message together. But yeah, you're seeing a lot of at risk. You're seeing a lot of like nuance. And you're also seeing it with the Republicans, right? Like you're seeing this far right versus this more centrist. And the fact you're seeing on both sides, I think it's going to be interesting and where those compromises happen and where they don't, because the places that are purple in the U.S. right now, and we've talked about this, there's a real mixed bag. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of interesting to see, especially juxtaposed against really, truly hardline social issues for the Dems, along with the economy, which we've talked about, and I'm sure, we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but I don't quite know how it's going to all shake out, and I'm really interested to see it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about two governors' races that were really in focus last night. Tudor Dixon, a conservative Republican, she had like 7 or 8 different competitors. Mm-hmm. She won in Michigan. She's going to go up against a well-known national Democratic figure, Gretchen Whitmer, who, by everything I've seen, is not the most popular governor in the history of Michigan. No. So that is going to be, just because of Whitmer's profile on the national stage, and Tudor's a relatively newcomer to this, mm-hmm. That's going to be a fascinating race in Michigan. I mean, that's, Michigan, as we talked about earlier, it is a purple state. There's no question about it. And then in Arizona, race is still too close to call, but Trump favorite Kari Lake, former newscaster on a local TV station, she is holding a 12,000 vote lead right now for the Arizona gubernatorial position. Now, again, it's not called yet, but Tom, I went back and looked at my history books. When you got a 12,000 vote lead, she's the likely winner based upon historical trends. And she was avidly supported by Trump.
Yeah, I mean, Lake surprised me a bit. I'm not going to lie. Out of all the major races that everyone was watching, I really didn't think she had it. I mean, in the last poll that I saw, I thought she was down 3 points, and the margin of error was 2, or maybe she was up 4, or she was up 4, and the margin of error was 3. But or she was down that. I mean, I'm glad you said, because Michigan is such a purple state that I don't think people give it enough credit for just how purple it really is, and just how. But that's one of those that is so economic dependent. The socioeconomics have an outsized importance, because the manufacturing industry that used to be in Michigan 30, 40, 50 years ago isn't there anymore. They're trying to rebuild. They're trying to change Detroit. There's some tech companies that have some pretty large footprints in either Detroit now or Ann Arbor. So they're trying to sort of rechange things there. And that one, where you and I go, is it the issues or is it the economy? Just how much it's going to play? Right. Michigan, maybe out of all the states that are sort of at risk or purple, or you're trying to wonder what they're going to do, especially in that gubernatorial election, that is one where I really think you're going to see that proof come out. That whichever is the bigger deal, I think it'll be another interesting bellwether for the United States as a whole.
Yeah, and the fascinating thing about the Arizona race, you had Trump supporting what the apparent winner, very, very close, 12,000 votes. Mike Pence supporting the opponent. And again, I don't really think this proves anything in the Trump-Pence situation if they end up running against each other, because Pence sort of came to that one a little late in the game, frankly. Yeah. Okay, but it was so close. I mean, if Kari Lake pulls out a win, okay, fine. We'll see what happens in November, because that's what really counts. And so again, for those that want to say, well, Trump won, Pence lost, I'm not in that camp at all. To me, it's too close to call. How much a presidential endorsement or a former vice presidential in Mike Pence, their endorsement really matters. I think with Trump, it matters a lot because people will, on the far right, if Trump says jump, they say how high. And so I think there's some degree of influence for Trump for sure. Maybe less with Mike Pence, but again, there was a lot. Look, on a race that close, what it illustrated, Tom, is your point about how the party is really split. Just like the Democratic Party split the far left and then what we call traditional liberal Democrats. We got the same thing on our side. We've got your traditional conservative Republicans, and then we got the Trump Republicans. So it's you're going to have to build a coalition to win in November. I can assure you of that because
And that's the thing about the Trump and Pence thing that I just chuckle because the wild card in all of that is DeSantis down in Florida. Because you want to talk about a coalition, you want to talk about someone who's going to absolutely split the middle of those two ideologies you talked about between Trump and Pence and his more traditional, at this point, it's very clear that Pence was the vice president to try and keep, a certain form of, I don't want to say leash on the former president, but a certain sort of remember the legacy conservative ideology, right? I mean, that was Mike Pence's job from the jump, is to bring those. And DeSantis, if he runs, is going to split right down the middle of the two of them. And if he can survive the fury of the Trump side, and scrape some of that, he knows how to play the conservative game and he knows how to play the far right game. And that's why I was that's why I laugh at any Trump versus Pence comparison. Cause to me, the bigger that gets, the more that DeSantis is going to chuckle and know that he's picking up 2 to 3 points each time that, for a primary each time that those two just slug it out.
Yeah. We had one disappointment last night. Joe Kent, who was running in Washington District 8, he'd been on the show a couple times. I thought he was a terrific conservative. Came in third last night. So there was a Democrat, there was the existing Republican. She's sort of a liberal Republican, but that is that district. I mean, Kent did good. He got 20%, but he missed out by 5 points. He came in third, so he's not going to be running in the general election. So our choices are the existing Republican who did vote to impeach Trump, or the Democrat. I'll take the Republican 100 out of 100 times if that's the case. We had an election. We wish Joe had won, but he didn't. So that's a little disappointing. All right, let's talk a couple international things. You've got a background. Pelosi's been getting some pretty high praise from members of the Senate, some members of Congress. Chuck Grassley stands out, but there were others. Mitch McConnell. Deafening silence out of the White House. Tom, why is the White House so silent on this when people of both parties are supporting her?
I think that one of the quotes that I saw from I can't remember if it was the DoD's press office or the Department of State's press secretary, but they were asked about China, saying that this is gonna, their quote, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was the effect of you're starting to awaken the dragon and there'll be consequences. And they're like, we are not commenting on this and engaging in saber rattling. I think that actually in this case, I think it's the smartest thing that the White House, be it left or right, if you're going to send a prominent congressional representative to a country like Taiwan that has a level of dispute with the largest thorn in our side in China, I think that is a very intelligent political maneuver to not comment on it and to leave it alone and let her peers in the Senate and in the House carry some of the water for it, as opposed to the Biden administration coming out and endorsing it. Because the minute he does that, it's now, that's one of the weird things about the United States that, I don't think that gets fully appreciated, is our president is both the highest elected official and also our figurehead / head of state. In the UK, you've got the prime minister that fits the first one. You got the queen that fits the second. And that's much more of the model around the world, and so the fact that we don't have that and it's one person, there is a level of nuance to the politics of how that one person has to act, that I'm very okay with the way that this is going down right now. And I would have expected the Trump administration to do the same, because of those two competing things.
Well, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo came out, and Pompeo applauded Pelosi. He said, hey, listen, China doesn't have the right to tell the United States that we can't have someone in a political office travel to a country we're allied with. I mean, they just don't. And really, China sort of blew this thing out of proportion. Had they not said anything, this would not have even been an international news story. But for political reasons, they wanted to blow it up, which they did. And, we disagree adamantly with Pelosi on a lot of stuff, but when I get Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State and likely Republican presidential candidate, and Nancy Pelosi on the same sheet of music, that's pretty impressive. And, say what you want about whether you agree or disagree with Pelosi. From the optics of it, I think she acquitted herself quite well.
I think she did. Look, she's a shrewd operator. Okay, you can't be in politics as long as she has overcome the things that she has. Be as a meme as often as she's a meme, and not have it. And I agree with you. Like Pompeo and her on the same page, McConnell and her on the same page. That says something about the United States. And I applaud her as well, like you do. I think that it's just the one point of where people are like, well, what is the White House thing? Or thinking that's a bad thing, or it's somehow a lack of an endorsement or a sign of weakness. No, it's just understanding the basics of statecraft and understanding that to do that would play into China saber rattling. And, we don't want to do that, nor should we, for that matter.
Yep. Hey, let's shift for just a minute. I want to talk about this Inflation Reduction Act. Oh, my God.
I knew this was coming.
I've mentioned that a couple times on the show. If that is not the worst name of a bill that I've ever seen, it's among the worst. I mean, this thing, Tom, I got to read a couple portions in this thing. Price controls in the drug industry. A lot of people say, hey, it's great. We're going to bring down cost on prescription drugs. Well, that may be true. You also may bring down the R&D budget at some of the pharmaceutical companies. 80,000 new IRS agents. Does the country really want 80,000 more IRS agents? Billions on green energy. Tom, is there a lot of cylinders built into this deal? Cylinder was the famous battery maker. I think it was in Michigan, the United States-based company.
Yeah.
They put billions of dollars in. They filed bankruptcy.
Yep.
Higher taxes. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. That's been pretty well documented. Right. And then from the Wharton School of Economics, they said this will have zero effect on inflation, none whatsoever, and there is higher risk of job losses. Tom, I'm glad Kyrsten Sinema is reading the bill and diligently taking her time, and she's likely going to wait for the Senate parliamentarian to make a decision. But Tom, where do you come down on this inflation bill?
So first of all, it's the dumbest name of a bill I've heard in a while. Like, let's start there. Like, it's not the inflation, whatever they called it. Like, I just started chuckling. This is where you and I sort of, we diverge, and where my moderate nature comes out a little more. One, I don't mind the investment in green energy, quote unquote, on the surface, as long as there's a good business case for it. And one of the things that I appreciated with the way that Manchin, especially being the coal czar in Congress, if you will, and I mean that just because of West Virginia's position in that industry, in Appalachia and things like that. He really forced Schumer and turned the screws on the progressive left and made sure that this, to me, from what I read, felt more like the attempt to invest, understanding the reality of CO2 emissions, and they need to come down, right? Like that's something that's sort of universally agreed on in science. So the fact that he was a huge check against sort of the radicalization and the trillions of dollars they wanted, I really appreciated. The second thing is, and especially because I work in tech, in the day job, the 15% corporate minimum tax is really something to say to the major tech companies to be like, you guys play the shell game on your multinational, because the way the money comes in, because it's just still the wild, wild west, and where the advertising money comes in. I mean, for example, Google last quarter did $69.9 billion in revenue, almost $70 billion in 3 months. And just the way that they park it and the way that, what I'm saying, that they move it overseas. Hey, look, if I get it, and great on the accounting, and I respect that, but I also know what the marketing budgets for those companies are. I know what, and I really don't want to hear it. on for most of those companies. Now some legacy companies that aren't service based, that are manufacturing based or things like that. Do I understand it? Yes, I do. Is that a little concerning? Yes, it is. But for me, it's like knowing how that game is played and being inside of it. Like all that 15% is telling, Andy Jansen over at Amazon that now you're actually going to have to pay taxes as opposed to not. And again, hats off to Manchin for being like, we're not going to 22%. We're not going to 25. There's this international standard of 15%, which, by the way, these companies that are multinational are paying in those individual countries anyway, and they're not complaining about that. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's where it's like, I understand the rhetoric, but the rhetoric of job loss and things like that, that's not happening. The analysts on Wall Street, I was leading the Morningstar report on that bill a couple of days ago. Morningstar isn't seeing a tangible impact in it. Like they're not. Interesting. Like they also the inflation report, and they don't think that we're in a recession, which I found very fascinating.
I concur with that. I mean, look, given the choice of Build Back Better or this, I'll take this 100 times out of 100.
Yeah.
My gut feeling tells me there'll be some amendments to this law. There'll be some tweaks to it. Hopefully, Sinema comes back with her input. I'm not opposed to spending the money on green energy. As you're well aware, Tom, I'm an all-the-above approach type guy.
Right.
I mean, oil, gas, coal, nuclear, wind, biomass, solar. I mean, I'm for all of it because, look, if we do anything to harm our domestic energy production, I mean, we're just going to have to go to the Saudis or other countries. That makes no sense. And when you're building coal-fired plants in India and in China, it's one thing to try to do the right thing, but let's not hamper our existing energy companies. In other words, let's not be punitive to energy companies. Let's take an all-the-above approach and get energy from whatever source we can get it from.
And that's where I appreciate it. I mean, some people didn't like it, but I actually appreciate some of the clean or so-called clean energy. I know you can parse that a little bit. Tax credits and things like that. As they moved in and that Manchin had sort of built in where it was like, hey, if Chevron doesn't want to play games or Schlumberger or some of these other major companies, they just want to keep doing what they're doing, they're just not going to get the credit benefit. Wow. But the other thing is, and that's starting, I find disingenuous of the oil and gas industry specifically, is I also have friends that work in the new tech there, and just how much they're investing in renewable energy and things like that, because they've seen the eventual pivot and the writing on the wall. So when I hear, especially with the way that things went nuts and, some of the profit margin they were making, which fair play, man, I am not saying don't go make your money. It's just when you start peeling back some of the layers of the onion, you start seeing a lot more of the interest lobby rather than the fairness of it. And I mean, look, I've got some complaints on the bill. There's some things I don't like, but again, this is where I get my moderate thing takes over, and especially the industries that I work in, in big tech. There's a lot more that I like about this than I dislike about it, especially when you look at it compared to the Build Back Better America. And again, like I love me a centrist, and as much as I disagree with Joe Manchin on a lot of things, I appreciate how he stuck to his guns. I appreciate how he said this is how it's going to work if we want to play ball. And with the prescription drug price thing, that of all the industries, like I don't want to hear about the R&D anymore. I'm really, really sick of it with all these drug companies where it's like, and the COVID vaccines are really sort of peeled that layer back, right? Yeah. You're gonna make money. They subsidize, they got it done fast in R&D, and then they subsidized the world costs because they knew that some poor countries couldn't pay for these vaccines. So they subsidized against their quote standard margin, and they still made billions, and their stock prices still went through the roof. And Moderna is now on the S&P 500. So the fact that you guys are only going to make 300% over 500%, I mean, look at the cost of insulin in the United States compared to the rest of the world. You can't tell me that's not price gouging.
No,
you can't.
I hear you. I hear you. There are some benefits to it. I'll acknowledge that.
Yeah. And that's what it is to me. And it's like, and the fact that, again, I appreciate Manchin, there's a cap on how many drugs they can negotiate for. You can't just like turn this into everything, because I think that the leverage play there is incorrect because of just how much Medicare and Medicaid buys. Like that there's an imbalance if the government is going to legislate a competitive advantage in a negotiation, right? So that's the business guy be like, no, but acknowledging things are out of whack, acknowledging how much power the the insurance companies have and how much they are a middle person that can really jack up rates. And that's proven. I mean, the Koch brothers, for crying out loud, said ended up supporting, the Affordable Care Act because they realized that it was going to save the United States $2 billion without, an access of care, or they would make more money. Like, come on. Like, the farthest right, most powerful, money men in all of Republican politics is okay with this after they did their own assessment. Like, I never understood why that didn't get more play. But, and there was a pure business case. They're like, oh no, we can make money on this. And we, and the American people are going to save, and it's going to cost the government less. And we want for small conservative government. Yeah, go for it. Yeah. So the fact that there was a limited scope to allow for, the selectivity, which I think keeps everybody honest, right? And then the ability for the average American to maybe not pay $300 and can pay $30 for their insulin the way that it is around the rest of the world with the same drug companies, and they're still making money. That's when I get okay with it. I really, I can bite off on that.
Let me close it out here, and then I'll get your closing comments. Tom, we got a couple minutes left. One good news, one bad news. Okay, bad news first. Household debt, it's up to like $16 trillion. It increased over $300 billion last month, and credit card balances increased 13%. That's the bad news, because and it's obvious what happened. A lot of Americans who are really feeling the pinch of this inflation, they suffered hard in May and June. Good news is oil prices actually have come down. It's $91 a barrel as of showtime today. Gasoline prices had fallen for like 46 straight days. So there is some relief at the pump happening. Now the question is, will it be short-lived? Because the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which the Biden administration has been emptying, they're going to have to fill it back up in the winter. And we'll see. I mean, look, to get these gas prices down from where they were 30 days, 45 days ago, that helps every American. We're happy to see that happen. But we're still in it. It's still high at 91, and average gas, across the country, low fours. It's still relatively expensive. So some good news, some bad news. But Tom, where do you see things going?
I mean, again, like we talked about this last time, we talked about the economy. Like on some levels, I don't know. I still feel first of all, I don't think we're in a recession. I really don't. I think that, for lack of a better term, nature is healing. I don't know any way to put it. I mean, the oil and the gas prices was an unfortunate thing, but that went rampant, but it was always going to be a problem. It was always going to go up because you have one of the largest oil and gas producers in the world in a shooting war that no one else in the world wants. That's basic economics. Of course it's going up some level. The fact that, we had lost capacity to drill, the fact that, we had some of these other things, the fact that we had to go back to the Saudis to get them to turn the spigot on, and forget about Khashoggi and some of these other human rights things that the Biden administration took all the stuff for, but did the right thing to, produce the energy the world needs. Like these are the considerations. So, I think that smoothed out. If I was going to be a betting man, I think that Brent crude ends up at about 45 a barrel over the next month or so. And I think that you'll see it tick back up as it gets colder about to where it is. But I think that the sort of shock to the economy has been smoothed out a little bit.
Did you say 45 or did you mean a high?
No, 85.
85. Okay.
85. I think it ends up at about 85. That's just my guess from what I've read and what I've seen. As far as the credit card debt and something like that, it's like, oh, you mean all of that free cash that got injected into the market the average person doesn't have anymore, and they went nuts with it? Of course it's like, and look, I mean, there is a very real thing for the poor and, the economically challenged that they're getting hit way too hard by this inflation. I want to be really sensitive to that. It's not fair. It's not right. But there is a lower middle class angle to this where all the free money's dried up. They've got a 650 or better credit score, and they haven't readjusted their buying habits. So they're just swipe. I mean, that's America on some levels. Like we're a consumeristic driven society. So there's all that huge reduction of debt during COVID. I was like, yay. And I'm just looking at this going, when that free money dries up, those debt balances are going to go back up. And guess what? They did. And you see that a lot of the, again, I think I said this the last time, but I'm a big Air Jordan fan. I grew up in Chicago. I'm back here. I love Michael Jordan. Jordans, and you have these secondary markets that for a while were just ridiculous. First of all, the most basic pair of Jordans, you couldn't get from Nike or anywhere else or the big box stores. And then you go to the secondary market, and I was paying like double. And I'm like, look, no, I'm sorry. Like, I got a good job and all that, but like, they're not worth it. This now, people like stocked up on that and like try to have this little business, and now they're like losing the money again because guess what? Guys like me that can afford it, that are single, that make good money, that have like that job. If I want to spend $200 on a pair of gym shoes, cool.
There you go.
But most people can't. Most people can't do that whenever they want to, right? And now, again, nature is sort of healing. So that's where I see it. Again, hats off to Powell for pulling the trigger on the 75 base points. And I say, like, my closing thoughts that I would say, I appreciate that. And I also appreciate that not only the Biden administration, but Congress is really letting him work. Like, the government is like, Jerome, we feel like you more or less know what you're doing. We're not going to nitpick the spade calls you're making right now. Get it under control. The Morningstar report, I read that in detail, that came out earlier this week, seems to be very positive on that. I mean, I hate it because I'm starting to look to, rebuy property. So I'm really not looking forward to that interest rate and, the buying power that I will have on that. It'll be a refi in like 3 years instead of the normal like 5, but price you pay, I guess. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate that for once, both sides of the aisle has recognized there's a problem and done the thing as hard as for every politician. That's just to be quiet and let the experts work.
Right. Well, Tom, as always, I appreciate the commentary. And, you call them balls and strikes. You call them right down the middle. And that's what I love about having you come on. We get a little bit of diversity of opinion. Today, you and I were pretty much on the same page on overwhelming majority of stuff today.
And that's the thing. Like, I don't think, at the end of the day, I don't think the left and the right's ever really that far off. It's part of the reason I'm centrist. It's like, there are very few binary things in life. And, you might be 2 shades of gray one way. I might be 2 shades of gray the other way. But it's always that. So I always love these conversations, and I'm always happy to be on.
Well, look to have you back soon. Hey, my closing comment is this, folks. After the election results last night, I stick by what I said earlier. I think the Republicans will take the House in the fall, but I think it's going to be a lot less seats than people are estimating. These estimations of 30 to 50 seats, I don't see it in my crystal ball. I'm more in the 2025 range, and people say, "Oh, Mark, you're too conservative." No, that's how I read it. And Republicans will lose some seats they should have won. Same thing will be happening for the Democrats. At the end of the day, I can't call the Senate. It's too close. But I do still think after last night's results, I feel good about the Republicans' chances in the House. Tom, look forward to seeing you soon. Folks, that's it for today. Thanks for viewing and listening. We will be back to close it out tomorrow. And we, as always, stay safe, and we will cut through the propaganda. We'll see you on Thursday.